Good Monday morning, you guys. Oh my gosh, the rain has passed. Okay. Dina has power, so it is a good day when Dina has power. But you guys are listening to Author Talk with me, Amy, and Dina is joining me today. And we are talking with our lovely author guest, Charles, who is over in London. I learned just before the show, so I'm excited to also dive into that. But Charles, we talk about our weekends first. And so I'm going to kick us all off and talk about our weekends. You guys know my weekends have been just chaotic and a mess in and of itself. My niece had a birthday party this weekend. They went roller skating. So I missed out on that, but a happy late birthday to her. On top of that, I did more unpacking. Okay. Just it's not a fun process. Doing laundry and just trying to get everything put together, which is just chaoticness in and of itself. Now we are bracing for Dina, get ready for it. I hope your AC continues to work because we are supposed to be in the heat index with humidity of like 108 this week on a good day. So now we went from rain to just on the verge of hell. So, we're just keeping it cool. Meadow's getting ready for school. We went and got a backpack for her. And so we're all gearing up for that in terms of just living the dream right there. But what all did everybody else do this weekend? Charles, what did you do this weekend?
My wife and I went up to Hampstead as guests of an old friend who gave us lunch at a house there that has exhibitions and performances and an art gallery, and it has a restaurant. And we ate in the garden. It was amazingly hot. I mean, this is London. That doesn't happen that often. Well, it's happening more and more often, I'm afraid. I mean, it was so hot we had to keep moving to try and get away from the sun. But that was nice. Then we walked a bit on Hampstead Heath, which is this big old sort of public park, which is a bit. People in London think it's countryside, but of course, if you know the countryside, it really isn't countryside. But it's very charming. It's very nice, and that's somewhere we go quite often, especially in the summer, because there's lots of interesting, strange things to do around there. There's an even bigger old house that we go and visit which is full of paintings by Rembrandt and Rubens and Van Dyck and people like that. It's amazing, and they do food and they have a garden and so on. It's trouble is everybody else thinks, oh, it's a beautiful day, let's go up to Hampstead. So it does tend to be a bit crowded.
Wow, man, crowds aren't my thing, but that sounds lovely. Just taking a walk and doing all that. And I'm sure your heat is nothing compared to a Texas heat.
Oh,
So
you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I mean, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I would take your heat any day.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. I mean, yes. I mean, the climate here is very mild, really. I mean, we complain, but it's probably now in the mid 80s, something like that. And for us, that's hot, and we're all complaining about it. But to you, that would be a nice, cool day, wouldn't it, in the summer?
Yeah, that's probably a really nice day. Really nice day.
That's spring.
Yeah, we don't get spring very long. I think spring, Dina, is like what, a week or two, and then we're done with spring and we're straight into summer.
Wow. Yes, we usually don't even get a summer here. It just stays sort of spring, then it turns into fall. Basically, it's cool and it rains a lot, and I don't mind that. I really don't mind that. It's very good weather for working.
Nice. I love the rain as long as it's not a hurricane. So,
yeah.
Well, you get quite a lot of those, don't you? Yeah, you get everything.
What, 2 weeks ago?
Wow. Yes. Yeah. And then you get
hurricanes and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, you get blizzards. Didn't Texas have this tremendous cold spell about, was it 3 years ago, 4 years ago?
Oh, we had that.
Yes, Ice-Mageddon.
Yeah.
Yep, Ice-Mageddon is what we call that. Yeah.
Yes.
And it really was. Well, we joke about it. You get like one ice flurry and people in Texas are like insane. They don't know how to drive. They don't know how to live. So.
Yeah. That's it. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, we haven't had real snow here now for years. We just get sort of maybe a couple of inches in the winter, not every winter, and then it usually melts in a few days. Whereas when I was a child in England, we used to get real winters with snow that was sort of six inches deep, maybe 8 inches deep. So something has definitely changed. I don't know whether that's an entirely good thing. Probably not.
Right. Well, we've had, part of going to what I did this weekend. For like a week, it's been like 80, 82, 83. So it's been really nice here until yesterday. And it was like 90. And it was 81 degrees in my house.
Yeah.
So, and then it was 85 degrees in my house, and it was 81 degrees outside. So,
yes.
So I think our refrigerator, or not our refrigerator, our AC froze up. I think that's a problem. But I got an AC guy coming. Well, he should be here in about an hour. So
right. I love that cat, by the way. What's her name?
Thank you. Her name is Alice. I had a black cat named Mowgli who he would be laying all over, but she's decided now I'm her person. After like 6 years, I'm her person now.
Yeah,
so.
they do get very attached to people. People think cats are sort of cold and standoffish, but that's not true. They can get completely dependent on a person. And
my cat is extremely standoffish, and
oh, really?
He looks like he will shank you.
But is he nice to you?
But he likes Dina.
Yeah, he likes to bite my nose.
That's all that matters. Yeah.
So, but he doesn't really like people. He will tolerate everyone in the house, but he runs. Mm-hmm. He's not a people cat.
No, well, that I think that's the best arrangement, when your cat likes you but doesn't like anyone else, because the chances are the cat's going to stay safe. It's cats that sort of go out looking to meet people that get into nasty
that come
situations.
Up missing. Well, I think he really loves my beer more than he loves me, because he was like all cuddled up to my case of beer last
You give him
night.
beer. He drinks beer.
No, but
he doesn't.
I think he likes it because it's cool. He lays up next to it.
Yeah.
So,
well, maybe you should give him a sip in the hot weather.
Yeah.
I had a friend who fed her cats cheese and chocolate, which I thought was weird, but the cats thrived on it. I mean, that's not in the list of approved food for cats.
Of approved things. Well, my cat won't eat table food.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And he won't. I have a hard time finding cat food he'll eat. But he's fat. I mean, he's like 18 pounds. He's huge.
Gosh, that is big. Yeah.
He's just picky. He's just a picky cat.
He's something. Zero is something.
He's sweet. He's sweet.
So, he's something.
You wouldn't want to get on the wrong side of a cat like that, would you?
So, when I would go out of town.
Okay. Well, Russell is out of. Oh my goodness, no. Well, Russell is out of town, and if I don't do his part for him, I will get a text message shortly after. Okay, so to do Russell's part for him, Russell had a hard time finding our show, you guys. We hear this every week. Now he can find it thanks to mine and Dina. Dina is the one that rebranded us. I just picked the colors, and she made it happen that now you can find us. And so we are top 10 independent book podcasts in America. We are on Good Pods, or what's it? Yeah, Good Pods, Amazon Music, Spotify, Apple, Google, all the other places, Spotify, that you can go and listen to a podcast. You can find our show. You can find all of our episodes that we have done every single Monday morning for the past 8 years. January will be 9. If you want to come and view us, because Charles, we have a lot of people that listen to us during the week and don't necessarily view us live Monday mornings at 10 a.m., you can come over to our Facebook group, any one of my social media channels, our YouTube channel as well. I am animated and talk with my hands, though. That is up for debate whether or not I control what comes out of my mouth. Russell always likes to say I have no poker face. But we love engaging, answering y'all's question, and just engaging with you guys during the conversation. So feel free to come on over to those channels if you want to check us out live and engage with us. If not, thank you so much for listening. Whenever you decide to listen, working out in the car, whenever it is convenient for you. We love it. We are incredibly humbled and grateful that we are in the top 10. This was Russell's idea when we started it 8-9 years ago almost with Sandy. And if you watch those videos and what we have evolved to now, it's a big difference. So I'm excited to see where all it goes in the future and what all is to come. There are a lot of book conferences, like we mentioned last week, happening. Some of them are fantastic. If you're not a big people person in person, I'm a big people person online. In person, I'm completely different. So there are a ton of online ones that are beneficial. Some coming up are Killer Nashville. If you are a thriller, killer, a mystery writer, those are great conferences to attend. The Women in Publishing one is doing their first in-person one in October in North Carolina. If you want to go and check that out, I will be there. I am a sponsor of that one. You guys know I am a big fan of Alexa's and her conferences in which she does. She is also doing her online one in March. So if you can't go in person, there are a ton of writers guilds that are hosting their conferences also this year in October. And so make sure that you check them out and take advantage, because the best thing any author can do, you guys all know, we talk about all the time, is building your author network and community. And how else to do that than to connect with other authors, right? And similar genres of you to kind of help you branch out and to help them. I know my cat is just going crazy, you guys. But on top of that, Charles, you are a writer. You have a thriller novel that is out. So Dina, let's get Charles talking about his latest novel coming out and just his writing journey in a whole. So Dina, take it away.
Yeah, so your book that's coming out, when's it coming out? Sufferance? Is that what it's called?
Yes. Sufferance, yeah. It came out on the 1st of May. So what, that's 3 months ago? Yeah, May and June, July, 3 months.
And what's the premise behind it?
Well, it's set in it's one of those books that's got literally no names at all, and there are no dates. And I usually hate books that do that, but when I was starting this one, I realized that that's what I had to do. And basically, it's set in an occupied country, a country that's invaded and then occupied by an enemy nation. It's about a family that take in a girl. She's a 13-year-old girl who's at school with his younger daughter. They hear that she's cut off from her parents. Her parents have been trapped by the war. They're in another part of the country. And so they get the idea of looking after her until her parents get back, which they think will just be a couple of weeks. And of course, what they don't know is that her parents are never coming back. The girl belongs to this, what I refer to as this different community or minority community, or I say she's of a different religion. So basically, we can think of it as being somewhere like Poland or Lithuania in 1941, 42, when the Nazis had occupied. But it could be almost anywhere. That was why I didn't want to give dates and I didn't want to give names. So it could be lots of countries now. It could be Ukraine right now, which has been invaded by a foreign country, and Russia is rounding people up and it's taking people away and it's kidnapping children and taking them away from their parents and taking them to Russia and giving them new parents. All of these things are still going on because they always go on, I'm afraid. So in my book, the father who's adopted this, who's taken the girl into the family, he has no idea what's going to happen. But of course, as the reader starts to suspect, gradually people in the girls' community are now being kind of isolated, and they're being listed, and they're being made to wear special badges indicating who they are, and there's a stamp in their identity cards, and things are getting more and more difficult for them. And that's basically how the novel works, that gradually the screw is being tightened. And this family, where the man has done what he thinks of as a generous thing, finds actually he's put himself and his family in great danger. Because eventually anybody who hides a member of this community is going to be in serious trouble. And his motives are mostly kind of well-intentioned. You know, he's sorry for the girl. He's a decent man, but also he knows that the girl's father happens to be a very rich businessman in the town, and he's an accountant. He's a bookkeeper working for the council, and he doesn't earn very much money. And he thinks, if I look after this girl, when her father comes back, he's going to be so pleased with me that he'll give me a much better paid job. So his motives are mostly well-intentioned, but there's an element of self-interest there.
Yeah. So, well, when I read the description, I've got a thing. I don't read or watch anything that has to do with World War II.
Yeah.
And that it's just, I was scarred when I was a child because I watched the Holocaust on TV.
Yeah.
So I was scarred by it. So when I first read your description, I thought, oh well, this is something I'm not going to read. You know, I mean, just not because of you, but just because of my own personal, foible. So, but the way you've explained it, it's not necessarily that. I think that sounds interesting. He goes in and he's being a human, and looking out for his fellow man. But there's there is just the thread that comes through there that it wasn't completely altruistic. The reason he took this child in.
Yes.
So did you have a hard time? Did you have a hard time separating what you figured was going to happen versus, what you knew actually happened because of World War II?
Well, I think once I'd got the idea of it, I thought there is a kind of inevitability about this. It can really only go in one direction. I mean, I was thinking partly of the Anne Frank story, which I think it's an extraordinary story of this girl in a family that hid for several years in an attic in Amsterdam. And Anne Frank, when you read the diary, she's 13 or 14, and she comes across, obviously she's very clever, but the thing is she's a troublemaker. She stirs things up. She's bored. She likes to kind of experiment with people and so on. And I thought to myself, supposing Anne Frank was actually much more trouble than the real Anne Frank. Supposing there was an Anne Frank that some family kind of tried to look after, but she turned out to be a girl with real kind of psychological problems. How would that work out? And that's what happens in my novel. The girl that they've taken into their house, although she seemed, sweet and innocent and charming and naive when they first met her, when after they've had her in the house for a while, they find that she is very, very disturbed and difficult. And it's not her fault. That's the point. It's not her fault, because it emerges that her family have treated her badly in various ways. So you've got this combination of this quite disturbed teenager coming into a family with all the pressure of the war going on around them, which mean that they've got to keep her hidden. They've got to hide from the neighbors and even friends and even relatives. They've got to hide the fact that they're looking after her. And of course, the family's got its own problems. And the arrival of the girl,
like all families do.
I mean, every family has its own problems, I suppose. But this family's got the problem that the mother has had some psychological disturbances, And she's always blamed her husband for not being more successful and making more money and getting a better job. And so he's trying, he's doing his best. And, you know, taking in the girl is, he hopes, one way of getting a better job. But the girl they take into their house kind of quarrels with the rest of the family. She's been very spoiled and she expects to get the same sort of treatment. But this family isn't as rich as her family and they can't afford it. And as everything gets worse, you know, the sort of food they can give her and so on gets worse and worse. And the older girl in the family, who is 17, she's a difficult young person as well, because she has ambitions to be a dressmaker, and all of that has been thrown into doubt by the war. She can't get a proper job, the colleges have shut down, so she's angry and frustrated and embittered, and the last thing she wants is this spoilt brat coming into the family and sort of getting all the attention. So it's a pretty explosive mix. You know, the politics outside are terrible, but the internal dynamics of the family are also pretty awful. So it sort of works its way towards, you know, worse and worse consequences.
That sounds interesting.
Well, I hope so. I mean, people do seem to have found it quite well. Some people have found it quite compelling. The wonderful novelist Valerie Martin read it and said that at the end her eyes were clouded with tears, which, you know, several people have told me. I mean, it comes to a pretty dark conclusion. But in a way, it's not completely dark, because it's really a story of courage and altruism and self-sacrifice, and how families defend themselves and people fight back. And the man in my family does the best he can to defend his own family and to defend the girl in the face of a really an almost impossible situation.
Well, what's the timeline of the book? Does it all take place within a year, or is it spread out over several years?
Yeah, it takes place within less than a year. It takes place over about 7 or 8 months.
So it's pretty fast paced.
Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah, I mean, I was fascinated by how when the Nazis occupied Eastern Europe, how they took over the countries and how they imposed their own dreadful laws and rules. And they did it mostly by using the local people, the local authorities, the local government, politicians, the local police forces, the civil service. And in the novel, I make that point because there's no, you never meet a foreign invader. You know, they've invaded, but then they've set up all these kind of puppet authorities who are doing the dirty work. And that's how it worked. That's how it worked all over Europe. The Germans really just, they sort of set it up, and then they were able to go on and conquer other countries, leaving the local police or the local authorities, the local armies to run the country along the lines they'd laid out, which is a pretty dark thought. That the nations were so prepared to collaborate.
Yeah.
You know, we always had this idea that we wouldn't have collaborated, but actually virtually everybody collaborated, because when a country is defeated and another powerful country takes over, what choice have you got? You collaborate, or pretty much you're dead. I know what you mean.
You're demoralized by the loss in the first place, so it makes it easier to bend to the stronger countries or individuals, or governments will. So
that's right. And I show how the younger people in particular, they think, well, you know, the world has changed. Our parents are still regretting the fact that this used to be a free, independent country, but the world has changed, and now we're part of a bigger empire. So let's make the best of that. And that happened in countries that have been conquered and occupied. a lot of youth movements were quite happy to go along with the Nazis. I mean, this happens in China, it happens in Russia. It happened all over Eastern Europe after the Second World War, when the Soviet Union took over. People were, on the whole, they were prepared to go with this new regime. I mean, it's a sad fact about human nature that on the whole we just kind of adapt. But I know what you mean about being traumatized by all of this. You said you were traumatized by that series, The Holocaust. And I
Yeah.
remember that. That was in the 80s, wasn't it? The early 80s, I think. And
Late 70s, early 80s.
yeah,
I mean, I was young.
yeah. Now, a lot of people knew nothing about the Holocaust until that series came out. But as it happens, I was traumatized earlier than that, because I'm a lot older than you. When I was 13, I went into the local public library in the little town I was living in, and I just happened to pull out of the shelves a book about Auschwitz. And at that time, this was 1961, I knew nothing about it because nobody ever talked about it. Nobody used the word Holocaust, and nobody ever talked about the fact that these terrible things had happened. And so I looked at this book, and there were the things that we all know about: the piles of dead bodies waiting to be cremated, and the barbed wire, and the starving people, and it completely traumatized me. And I didn't know anybody. I didn't tell anybody about it, because I think when really bad things happen to you when you're that age, in a way you can't talk about it. Um, I don't know quite why, but you feel it's almost it's your fault, and that if you talk about it, you'll be in trouble. People
You kind of
will
like
be
go
angry.
to a wounded animal stance. You know, you're
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
don't don't want to share this horror with
I
anybody.
think that's it. That's it exactly. So I read this book, and it completely made me kind of rethink what human beings were capable of. Because I had just never come across, such sort of systematic wickedness. Uh, because when you study history, in a way, you think, oh well, that's history. That happened a long
It
time
can never
ago,
happen again. It
or
can
it would
never
never
happen
happen.
again.
But this had all happened just 2 years before I was born. It wasn't really history. Um, it was something that had happened not that far away and not that long ago. And so it was really quite hard for me to kind of accept that the world I was living in was really the world that these things had happened in.
That could produce such horror. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think there's there's a quote, and it's been paraphrased. I paraphrase it, but it's Thomas Paine, and it's those who don't remember your history are bound to repeat it.
yes, yeah, I've heard that. Yeah, I think that's right. Absolutely. Um,
And so, you know, I always knew about the Holocaust.
yes,
Um,
yes.
and then when I saw that on TV, and I watched it by myself. I
Oh,
mean,
right,
my mother
right.
was not around, and it was
Yeah,
just, I
yeah,
remember being physically ill
yeah,
about
yeah.
what took place.
Yes.
And so it's just, when Schindler's List came out, I couldn't watch it.
No. Yeah.
The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, I
Oh,
couldn't
yes,
watch it.
yes. Yeah,
Nothing that had to
yeah,
do
yeah.
with that. Um, just the evil that man would inflict
Yeah,
on man was,
yeah,
oh my God.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I can understand that. Yes, by the time you
So
were
to take,
13,
sorry, so to take that premise, but and use it as the basis for this book, but not actually have it be the basis for the book. That
yeah,
sounds interesting. So
yeah.
that,
Well,
maybe I can.
I didn't want to go into any kind of detail. There aren't gruesome details. It's really, it's kind of more or less, it's evoked. It's left to the reader to figure out what's going on. Because we already we know what was going on pretty much. So I don't need to tell them. I don't need to show the reader. So I just kind of remind the reader that these things were going on, that people were disappearing. Your neighbors would suddenly vanish, or people you worked with for years, suddenly they wouldn't be there, and you didn't ask questions, because if you asked questions, you were kind of likely to get into trouble yourself.
Yeah, you're bringing attention to yourself, and
Yes.
maybe you're going to disappear.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. But I think it's good that people know more about it, that your generation knew more about it, whereas my generation didn't know anything about it. And then it started to be talked about more as the 60s wore on. And then, as you say, there were films like Schindler's List, and there was Sophie's Choice, which was a novel first. And I almost wonder if now there's not too much about it, in a way, and too much that's kind of dwelling on it.
No, because you've got so many Holocaust deniers.
Well, yes.
I don't know if that's as big a problem in the UK as it. I mean,
No,
because
it's not.
y'all's
No.
buildings were actually decimated by the bombing that went on. I mean, it was really the continental U.S. was actually untouched by physically untouched. So, which I just think that's horrible.
I don't think Holocaust denial is a problem in the UK. Funnily enough, it's much more of a problem in the countries that did it. Germany and Austria, they have a lot of Holocaust deniers, and I think that's probably because people don't want to believe that their fathers or their grandfathers or their great grandfathers did these terrible things. And I can sort of understand that. I mean, I think it's wrong, and it's also stupid because there's so much evidence. But I can understand that people just don't want to take responsibility on behalf of their ancestors for a thing like that.
Well, but I don't know. I mean, when is it not a matter of sins of the father?
Well, I think I don't believe in hereditary guilt. I really do think that the idea that you are responsible for things that your parents or your grandparents, great parents, or even people did in the 18th century, you're not responsible for those things. You're responsible for your own actions. And I think sometimes there's a kind of sentimentality about this, that people beat themselves up over things that happened a long time ago that they weren't responsible for. Now, the best example of this was the Prime Minister here, Tony Blair. About 20 years ago, he went to Ireland and he apologized on behalf of the British people for the Great Famine in Ireland, which took place in the 1840s. And of course, he wasn't responsible for that. Nobody alive was responsible for that. What he didn't take responsibility for was the things that he himself had done, the mistakes that he had made. I mean, maybe we're getting a bit political here, but Tony Blair was one of the people who believed in invading Iraq. Now, what a great idea invading Iraq was. It unleashed an absolute disaster in the Middle East, which we're still suffering from. It was a terrible thing to have done, and he's never apologized for it. So that's an example of how people are very happy to apologize for things they didn't do, but not for the things that they did do.
Yeah. And you weave all of this through your book. You bring out the personal foibles as well as the greater.
Well, what I try to do is I try to make the narrator a man who the reader in some ways identifies with and says, yes, he's a decent man, he's doing his best. He's got a difficult family, he's got a wife who's has psychiatric problems, he's got a rather angry elder daughter. Now he's faced with a war, there's bombing, there's food rationing. He's trying to help this younger girl from outside the family. he's doing his best. He's also motivated a little bit by wanting to get a better job, but there's nothing wrong
What's
with
in
wanting
it
to get
for
a better
me?
job. He wants to get a better job so he can give his family a better standard of living. So I wanted to make a character that the reader would identify with, but then put him in a situation that was so morally complicated that the reader just wouldn't know how he should react. And a lot of people have written to me, or reviewers have said, the book made me wonder, how would I have reacted? What would I have done if I'd been in the shoes of that man? And that was exactly what I wanted to do, to create a really, really difficult kind of moral dilemma. Because I think when we think about the Holocaust, or any kind of horrible act that's taking place somewhere else or has taken place, we think to ourselves, I wouldn't have acted badly. I would have been brave and courageous and noble and done the right thing. But I wanted to create a situation where it was almost impossible to know what the right thing to do was. And so what the man does as the novel progresses is I hope, heart-wrenchingly difficult for the reader to follow, because we can't say he's doing the wrong thing, and yet we know he's doing the wrong thing, because he's got into a situation where there is no right answer. That was what I set out to do in the book. And honestly, I mean, I didn't know. I don't know what to do. I don't know how I would have behaved if I'd been that man.
On that overarching moral issue.
Yeah, that's it. It's the most difficult moral issue you can be faced with. That's what I wanted to create, because that's what, when history goes wrong, when bad things happen in a country, we are faced with really horrible, difficult decisions, I think. I mean, take France. I mean, when they were occupied by the Nazis, what on earth would they do? They knew that everything they valued, because the French have such a strong tradition of liberty, belief in their republic, and so on. And this was an obscenity to them, the Nazis coming in. So would they join the resistance? If they joined the resistance, they were not just endangering themselves, they were endangering their families, because when the resistance people were caught by the Nazis, they would often shoot the whole family. That sort of horrendous dilemma is what I wanted to explore. And thank heavens we live in societies where we don't have to face those terrible dilemmas.
Yeah, and the best thing you can do as an author when you write a book is to make the reader stop and think.
Yeah, that's it. That's what I think that's what I've always tried to do, to put the reader into the book and make them care about whatever the central character was going through, but make them think, is this character doing the right thing? And in the book before this, I took a very, quite a difficult character, and a lot of people really didn't get on with the book because they said I just didn't like that young man. That's a book about a 17-year-old in the mid 19th century, in a book called Rustication. And he's in a way, he's not very nice. He does really quite bad things. He's arrogant. He takes drugs, because people did take drugs in the 19th century. Drug addiction is not a new thing. He abuses drugs. He abuses alcohol. He more or less, we would say, molests a younger girl. So he does a lot of quite bad things. But what I wanted to do was to show that he was in a really, really difficult situation, a situation with his family and with his circumstances that was so bad that the reader would understand why he was doing these bad things, and would see that actually beneath all the sort of arrogance and conceit, there was actually a decent human being struggling to get out. And so that was a difficult thing to do. And for some readers it worked, but for a lot of readers it really didn't. I wanted to show him, learning and becoming a better person because of the things that were happening to him. But some of my readers, I think, never forgave him for being such a brat. So that's, that's worth doing, I think. You don't want to just take a character who is completely likable and does all the right things. That's not really kind of making the reader have any sort of imaginative experience, is it?
Well, that's not how humans are.
No, absolutely no. It doesn't engage the interest because we don't really believe in such characters.
Yeah, not everybody is all good. Not everybody. Well, I hate to say this. Not everybody's all bad.
No, absolutely not. No. And people are very dependent on the circumstances that they're put into. And in that last book, Rustication, I put my character into a terrible situation where he'd been he'd behaved badly, so he'd been expelled from university in disgrace. He comes home, he finds that his father has died, and he's died a bankrupt. He's ruined the family. And worse than that, he's been involved in a really sordid sex scandal. So the family's not only without any money, they've also had to retreat into a remote house in the countryside away from everybody because he's brought shame on them. So, under those circumstances, if you're 17 years old and your life is in front of you, and you suddenly find that your father has blighted it, has really destroyed your chances, and you find that your mother and your elder sister are not helping you at all. They're actually, for various complicated reasons I can't go into because it's too long and complicated, they're actually working against you. Your own family, this is an idea I've always found interesting. People realizing that their own family are hostile to them for some reason. And that happens in families. I've seen it happen in a family. It can happen for all sorts of complicated reasons, often going right back into the childhood of a brother and sister, say, or a child's relationship with its mother or its father. There's a deep hatred. There may be superficial love and affection, but underneath there can be a deep hatred. And that's what my character comes up against. He gradually has to realize that his sister and his mother are not trying to help him. They don't have his best interests at heart, just the opposite. And I think some readers found that quite a hard thing to accept. You have to be very careful what you say about the sacred institution of the family. But we all know that they can go horribly wrong. And that's what often leads to people being alcoholics and addicts, ending up in prison and all the rest of it. Something's gone wrong in their family. Not their fault. But then at some point it is their fault, isn't it? We've all got the ability to step back and see what we are and how we got there and say, well, okay, this isn't my fault. My parents did these things to me, but actually I can now take control of my life. And not an easy thing to do. Not an easy thing to do, especially if you're an addict or an alcoholic or if you're in prison. But people do manage to do that.
I like books that focus on the human experience.
Yeah.
And growth.
Yes. Well, I'm reading.
Okay, so now there's another book that I have to put on my TBR list. Since now you put me in these, and it's not actually about World War II. So.
No, it's not really. I mean, you can read it as being about sort of any time, any place, because basically human nature doesn't change. You get the same sort of configuration.
Your eras might change. You might not have a cell phone, but
yeah, absolutely,
people are still people.
Yes, that's absolutely right. I mean, basically, we're really no different, I think, from the ancient Romans or people living in caves, 10,000 years ago. We haven't evolved as people. We haven't evolved morally or intellectually. We've evolved technologically. So we're cavemen with nuclear weapons, basically. It's not a very cheerful thought, is it?
That's now I'm going to wonder what a caveman would do with a cell phone.
Yes.
Neanderthal man walking around with his iPhone.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Well, we are running out of time, but before we run out of time, Charles, I want to know, are you working on anything else? What's upcoming for you and your writing journey and your writing
Yeah.
path?
Yes, I am. Well, I have to go back 36 years to explain this. The first novel I published was called The Quincunx, and it was a hugely long kind of imitation of a Victorian novel. And it came out in 1989. And to my astonishment, I can say honestly, it became a bestseller. Nobody was more surprised than me. And when I'd finished it, I'd spent 12 years writing it. I said to myself, I'm never going to write as long a book as that again. I'm never going to write a book set in that historical period. It was set in around 1800. And can you believe it? I was already making notes for another very long book set in that period. And that was 36 years ago. And I've been working on it ever since. This will be one of the longest gestations in literary history, I think. But I'm now quite close to finishing volume 1. And it's another novel set in that sort of period, which fascinates me. And it's about a young man growing up in about the 1780s, and again he's got tremendous difficulties at home. He's got a brutal, domineering father. He's got a weak mother. He's got an aunt who wishes him harm, but she's very charming about it and duplicitous. And of course, he's got all sorts of big issues coming up because we're on the brink of the French Revolution, and he's going to get very involved in the sort of implications of the French Revolution and the desire to overturn the political system and bring in social justice. Because I've long been fascinated by how the French Revolution impacted on other countries, because it kind of set off sort of little forest fires all over Europe, including in England. But in the other countries, the fires were extinguished. They didn't really take. And that's a fascinating subject. Young people all over Europe suddenly thought, yes, we can be free. We can tell our parents to get lost. We can get the right to vote. We can have
guillotine.
Well, this is the thing, that revolution, of course, it turned deeply nasty and it started destroying its own people. And revolutions always do that.
Yeah.
Every revolution in history, I think, has ended up destroying the people who perpetrated it and turning upside down everything that they were fighting for. So that is a fascinating subject. But basically, it is the story of a boy and his family and the girls that he falls in love with. That's the sort of center of it. And also at the center of it is I've been very interested by the way that they, at that time, all over Europe, they started improving the land. They called it improving the land. And that meant things like draining marshes and pushing the sea back. And so that's a big issue in my novel. There's a huge endeavor to reclaim a lot of land and sort of make it more productive and more lucrative. Now, this is the great delusion that human beings have suffered from for the last few hundred years. We've kind of improved the land, and actually what we've done is we've poisoned it and polluted it, and we've destroyed the delicate balance of nature. And that was already happening in the 1780s, and that's a theme, because it has, in my novel, it has terrible consequences for the people living there, and that's historically true. When you improve the land, you actually drove out the people who had been happily living there, making a living. I mean, it's very like what happened to Native American Indians. In fact, Europeans came along and improved all the land by driving out the Native Americans and killing off the buffalo and the bison, and sort of laying waste to those areas, cutting down the forests and all the rest of it. And we think of it as a great improvement. And in a sense, it was an improvement because it allowed a much larger population to grow. But now we know what's going to happen, because the Earth cannot sustain that larger population that we've now created. Sorry, that was a bit of a rant. These are things I think that people people do care about. But I hope it's interesting for people to see sort of how far back those ideas were in play, how far back people were already talking about how wonderful it would be to make these improvements. And other people were saying, well, wait a minute, steady on. Are you sure that these really are improvements? If it involves turning the people there into beggars, homeless beggars, driven into the cities to make a living by begging on the streets or stealing, can we really say that that's an improvement? So anyway, that's, these are big themes, I suppose.
Yeah, I think they're things that people have a hard time talking about or having conversations about, right? Like, things can be so divided and they can cause division within friendships and stuff. So people tend not to talk about these things. And I commend you for wanting to write and have these and for working on it for 36 years, Charles. Oh my goodness. We're going to have you back on to go more in depth about that book. But this has been such a fun and just enlightening conversation. We don't get to have these conversations very often on here, and for me it's always refreshing and just mind stimulating to have these kind of conversations, right? I think it's important, and it just shows the path in which writers take, and their journey to becoming published is different, and their thought process and what they choose to write about is a beautiful thing because it's always so different, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. So sadly enough, we are out of time for today. But Charles, we will have to schedule you back on because I really want to continue talking about.
Oh, with pleasure. Yeah. Well, I've enjoyed it.
This book that you're on, it's a fabulous conversation. So we will have to have you back on. I will get with Mickey to make that happen because I want to dive further into this.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you, and thank you, Dina. Thank you very much. Thank you, Aimee. And
Absolutely.
Thank you to your beautiful cat. I hope the cat is on again.
Yes, I know. I'm sure she will make her appearance. She's asleep under my chair at the moment.
Well, she's a real star. She's a complete natural. You wouldn't think she knew the camera was on, would you?
No, she is a funny thing. She is. But we all hope that you, Charles, and everybody else has a fantastic Monday and a great rest of your week. Until next Monday.
And you too. Great. Well, thanks so much.
Okay, bye, everybody.
Goodbye, Dina. Goodbye, Aimee.